Hello, my name is Anish Gopala. I'm happy to partner with the Santa Clara County Library District to present to you D-Day during World War II, the largest amphibious invasion in history. So in order to understand D-Day, we need to understand what's going on in Europe in 1944, which was the year in which D-Day happened. And essentially what is happening is the Germans have established a foothold on the European continent. And they've taken essentially all of Europe, almost all of Europe, except for small parts of it. You can see they had puppet states in a lot of these countries. Portugal, I believe, was relatively untouched by Germany, but don't quote me on that. Spain, they had a lot of influence in Spain. So you can see in almost all of Europe, they have a lot of influence. And this is terrible for the Allies, Britain, the Soviet Union, and America, who are fighting against them. The Soviet Union is seeing success in repelling German attacks, but the British and the Americans, who are the Western Allies, have realized in order to win this war, we need to take back France. It has to happen sometime. It may not happen soon, but it has to happen sometime. Just thinking logically, right? Yes, they've been able to take some of Italy, but what happened was they started meeting fierce resistance along what I believe was called the Gustav Line of defense. And then they realized there's no way we're going to be able to just keep going up the Italian peninsula and take Europe, right? That wasn't going to happen. So they realized the only way we can do this is if we establish a foothold on the European continent, specifically France. The question was when and where on the French beaches. However, Germany, or Hitler, has been preparing for this, and we'll see how in the next slide. They were building something called the Atlantic Wall. Essentially what it was a giant amount of fortifications along where the United Kingdom was to stop any sort of amphibious invasion, right? Remember, D-Day was an amphibious invasion, right? From water to land, right? And so essentially they have each of these little dots here. These are all fortresses, giant fortresses. So that should give you an idea of just the scale of the Atlantic Wall. And the general put in charge of it was a man by the name of Erwin Rommel. So he also fought in many other parts of World War II. He was a very good commander, a very intelligent man. And he was sent by Hitler to supervise the construction of the wall. And when he goes there, he realizes that what Hitler has done will not at all be enough to repel an actual Allied invasion. And so he orders the construction of new fortresses, more guns, more stakes, more defense, more soldiers. And that made it really tough for the Allies to actually get what they wanted. So we need to understand, another reason to understand the success of D-Day is to understand the Allied deception on D-Day. There was all sorts of ways that they deceived the Germans. And we're going to look at all of that. So the first thing was they attacked Normandy instead of the Pas de Calais. This is the Pas de Calais, by the way. Notice that it is the closest point between the UK and France. And therefore, it's the most convenient for a landing force. However, the UK predicted that the Germans would have suspected that and they would have closely defended that area. So they realized it's probably not a good idea to attempt that. Instead, they decided to go for the lightly defended Normandy beaches, which are more far away but much less defended, which they've gotten from their spies and agents in Germany. And so what they do is they send the Ghost Army, it was called the Ghost Army, to the Pas de Calais to arouse the German suspicions. And we're going to see what the Ghost Army was. The Ghost Army was just a bunch of inflatables. So essentially, they did have some men in charge of it, not a huge amount of men. I think there were about 20 to 50 men, somewhere around there, in charge of building this army of inflatables, if you will, which from far away looks like some kind of huge realistic army, but in reality, when you see it, it's just a bunch of inflatables. However, remember, from far away, it looks very convincing. And so when the Germans see this coming towards them at the Pas de Calais, they're like, what the absolute heck? That is a giant army. There's no way they have that much. Little do they know, these are just inflatables. And so let's go back to this slide. You'll see that the Ghost Army comes first. And so essentially what happens is that the Germans move their forces to the Pas-de-Calais, which means that there's less defense for the beaches of Normandy, and that also allows for the Allies to establish a foothold. Let's go to the next slide here. Ruperts. Ruperts, again, from far away, they look a lot like paratroopers. And so the idea was we can just freak the Germans out by dropping a bunch of these. Each of these is not expensive to make. They're pretty cheap to make, very easy to make. They're just filled with, I believe, either clay or sand, one of the two. So the idea was, if we can just build a bunch of these, and we can make them look like paratroopers, the Germans are going to be freaked out, right? Because what they did was they dropped these upon German troopers, and so the German troopers would run away at seeing this giant army. And then they realize, oh wait, it's just a bunch of little clay sacks, if you will. And so what they're able to do is they're able to deceive the Germans by basically dropping these far away from the landing sites. And so the Germans are told, hey, there's a huge paratrooper landing, we need to send troops there. Then they just go there to realize, oh wait, these are not actual men, these are Ruperts, and they were called Ruperts. Double agents. I don't know this man's name, but I know for a fact that he was a British collaborator who pretended to be Nazi, and it was this was one of the ways that the British and the Allies, I should say, were able to gain intelligence that the Normandy beaches were lightly defended by the Germans. Additionally, they coordinated with the French resistance, Vive la Résistance, and so this gave them a lot of valuable info on where to attack, and the French resistance provided a lot of important contributions to D-Day that should not be forgotten. So here's another diagram of just what happened on D-Day. We have the real army here, and then the ghost army arriving at the Pas-de-Calais. And it's important to note while we're here on this slide is that the Normandy landings were many days. D-Day was the first day of the Normandy landing, so that's the difference between those two terms. So the planning of D-Day. Now remember, there was America, Britain, and also Canada was involved in the war. So we'll notice that it was not just America doing everything, right? And so they needed help. They can't take this giant beach just by themselves. They need help. And so what they do is they split the beaches up amongst themselves, right? We have Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juneau, Sword. And each nation takes one or two of these beaches and decides, okay, I'm going to be in charge of this beach. And I put the number of troops that were landed on each beach here, right? Notice Omaha, there's a large number of troops, and that's because a lot went wrong on Omaha Beach. It became just a bloodbath. Eventually, the United States did prevail with just manpower, but it was bloody and it was horrible. The same with Juneau. There were heavy casualties here for the Canadians. So we've learned about all their planning, but let's see exactly what happened on D-Day. So at first, the landings were postponed. It was supposed to be on, I believe, June 5th, but it happened on June 4th instead, if I'm not mistaken. Sorry, it happened on June 6th instead, if I'm not mistaken. And it was postponed for a day due to bad weather, right? You cannot launch an invasion with bad weather. It will just be repelled. It just does not work. They had to have good weather. Additionally, Hitler and Rommel were not present. I believe Hitler was asleep and everyone was scared to wake him up because remember, he's a Führer and he's a dictator, right? And additionally, Rommel, the general that was in charge of the Atlantic Wall, he was in Berlin visiting for his wife's birthday. And so we have these two key men not in position to command their troops. There was no proper leadership, and that allowed for just confusion in the German lines. Additionally, the assault was preluded by a giant cannon assault and then a paratrooper attack, and then only did the actual land force move in. And despite what happened on Juneau and Omaha beaches, the invasion was successful. From here, the Allied forces moved on to other towns like Caen. So here are the statistics of the Normandy landings. And Mulberry harbors are basically man-made islands, just sailed across the Atlantic, the English Channel to make it quicker to provide oil and food to troops. This is my bibliography. Thank you for watching. I hope you learned something new about D-Day.